Learning mathematics is inevitable to all children as it is one of the core and compulsory subjects throughout their education. Students with visual impairment face number of challenges in learning mathematics. First and foremost, visually impaired has difficulty in observation. If we see the sighted children, they observe and imitate what they are visualizing. Visually impaired students lack this visual observation and imitation. Also, visually impaired learn at slower pace. The reason for this is not only the innate abilities, but also because of difficulties in estimating knowledge, visual motor coordination and problems with illustration of information. In order to execute these functions, visually impaired need more time than their sighted peers, and this makes their learning slow. Conceptual development in every individual follow Piaget's 4 stages of intellectual development. They are sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage and formal operational stage. Visually impaired students perceive objects in their environment as parts rather than whole because of their lack of visual sensory input. As a result, most of these students has difficulty reaching the Piaget's final formal operational stage in understanding math concepts. Concept formation in math involves one's knowledge and skills related to mathematics. It includes conceptual understanding of numbers, their relationships, combinations and operations. Mathematics also includes shapes and their structure, reasoning, measurement, classification and patterns. Since math is also about generalizations and abstractions, math skills during the early years help children to connect ideas, develop logical and abstract thinking, to question, analyze and understand the world around them. It is observed that early math skills are highly predictive of later academic achievement in multiple subject areas. Also, there is considerable variation in the rates at which all children acquire mathematical understanding. The breadth of math concept development is usually related to the breadth of perceptual experiences. There are various general limitations observed in students with visual impairment to acquire mathematical knowledge. They are absence, incompleteness or misinterpretation of visual perception and visual images. They also lack analytic and synthetic action, that is related to lack of skill in distinction. Visually impaired will not be able to classify or differentiate different objects because of lack of visual perception. In addition, they experience reduced concentration as they are distracted soon and lose concentration in doing a task. Also, they face difficulty in perceiving the space and so experience disorders in visual motor coordination. Insufficient level of reading and writing are also observed among them, and so they restrict themselves in doing continuous visual work. Apart from these, they exhibit inappropriate emotional reactions, facial gestures and body language. Because of this, their social relations get disturbed. The limitations such as lack of natural mathematical visual stimulation is observed among them owing to their deficient visual perception. Even though the visually impaired exhibit good intelligence level on par with the sighted peers, their visual impairment limit their cognitive functions and restrict them in learning math concepts. Also, specific mathematical concepts are not precisely perceived by them and sometimes they perceive them wrongly. They also exhibit slowness in learning from tactile material and large print. Poor resources restrict them to access mathematical literature like books, teaching materials, papers and other learning materials. Also, they face difficulty in preparing mathematical information and doing math calculations like solving exercises. In the process of overcoming the limitations in learning, visually impaired students are integrated into the regular classroom on the basis of auditory channel of learning supported by learning materials in braille and tactile images. The mastery of the tactile image is associated with several cognitive problems faced by the visually impaired students. The first of them is related to the difference between the simultaneous character of visual perception and the successive character of tactile perception. The second problem stems from the fact that the process of concept formation in visually impaired students is dominated by two extremes. First one is extremely abstract verbal notions that have little support in the learner's experience, and the second one is extremely concrete tactile images of everyday life objects that possess little potential for generalization. The third cognitive problem is directly related to the predominant methods of education for visually impaired. This almost completely excludes two-dimensional schematic representation of objects and processes such as diagrams, charts, plans and maps. As a result, many of the cognitive tools used by regular students remain underdeveloped in visually impaired learners. Because of this, they face problem in accessing technical math notations, accessing visual resources and also understanding the visual concepts. They are forced to learn math concept without vision, and so visually impaired students does not always connect math symbols with what they represent. Most of the time they do not remember the meaning of math symbols. Also, they face problem in understanding abstract problems. In addition to this problem, they have difficulty visualizing and identifying patterns. Further, they find it difficult to make generalizations and tends to think concretely. They view mathematics as disparate parts and does not see the connections. Because of this, they work partly and avoid viewing any math concept as a whole. Also, they have problem in identifying key points and view new problems as unfamiliar. Further, they do not see a connection between new problems. All this prevents from attaining metacognitive awareness, which is essential to understand what they already know. Further, the traditional teaching methods by which math concepts are taught using chalk and talk methods make the math subject more inaccessible to visually impaired. Also, researchers have shown that both special education and regular teachers lack competency in adopting math curriculum to meet the needs of the visually impaired. In learning mathematics, the visually impaired children, especially the one who totally lacks vision, develop differently than do sighted. For example, the Piagetian notions of object permanence, conservation of mass and conservation of volume are a few of the developmental milestones that may be delayed for visually impaired children. These simple concepts remain vague without special efforts to develop a sense of these notions through tactile experience. As mathematical learning is hierarchical, it is vitally important that the basic lower level concepts are fully understood before attempting to move on to a higher level of task. The understanding of math concepts like seriation, classification, discrimination, comparison of concepts, distance and time, and the concept of geometry will be incidental and takes no time for the sighted to learn. But visually impaired faces challenges in learning these concepts. Seriation is the ability to arrange objects in order by size. These seriation skills are often related to more complex math concepts, such as ordination or placing numbers in the correct order. It also helps to develop higher order thinking and problem solving skills. Basic to the understanding of number is an understanding of the conservation of number. In conservation of number, the number remains the same in quantity even with the transformation in objects to which it is applied. Visually impaired children can't perceive a number as whole. For instance, when we consider sets of 6 like 6 chairs, 6 cups and 6 bottles, they may not be able to group the property of 6, 8 or 12 easily. Much practice must be given to develop seriation skills of quantity with emphasis on more or less, matching, counting and comparing. When we take classification skills, sighted children acquire this classification skill in their day-to-day routine activities. For example, they can distinguish large dogs and small dogs at a quick glance. The child who is visually impaired has to touch and smell to classify objects and may not have the opportunity to experience this kind of incidental learning in everyday environment. Similarly, visually impaired have never encountered the discrimination of objects. They need experiences with every article. Before moving to more abstract level of discrimination like sorting triangles, circles and rectangles, they need many matching and sorting activities with real objects of different sizes, shapes, textures and weights. Like seriation, classification and discrimination skills, the ability to use the mathematical language of size, width, length, height or weight is vital. The mastery over the skill of comparing the concepts also takes time in visually impaired. Activities involving comparison like large and small, rough and smooth, hard and soft will help them to develop understanding towards the comparison of concepts. Also, their inability to see the object as a whole restricts them to clearly understand the concepts. Mathematical problems which directly or indirectly involve the concept of distance and time are difficult for students with visual impairment. Understanding the concept of geometry largely depends on spatial sense. Mastery over geometrical concepts involves understanding of the spatial properties. These properties include shape, size, distance, orientation and relative location. As poor spatial awareness is a problem for visually impaired, they use it to examine one aspect of a thing at a time. Mastery of geometrical concepts by visually impaired beyond a basic level is often very demanding. Teachers should encourage visually impaired children to count all sorts of objects by exposing them to a wide variety of stuffs. This will help children to identify and understand the difference between objects and their characteristics. At the time of students' interaction with the object, teachers should verbally label the objects, pointing out their similarities and differences. Also, teachers shall make use of games to arrange objects according to its shape and size. This will help them to acquire number concepts and quantities. They can also draw children's attention to numbers around them and for what they are used for. For instance, one can make them to find address, price of a particular object and can ask them to identify size of the shoe. Further, teachers can motivate students to make use of fingers to practice counting. Once the student attains mastery over the concept of number and quantities, the concept of number relationships and operations can be taught using everyday experiences by posing questions like, do we have enough chairs for everyone and who is third in line? Questions like this will make them to explore the objects in their environment. Teachers should help children with visual impairment to become familiar with skills and vocabulary of estimating. This can be done by using words regularly including more than, less than, about, near, approximately and in between. Also, teachers can frequently ask children to estimate how much, how long or how many during their leisure time. This can be acquired by encouraging visually impaired children to identify different shapes. Teachers should not restrict with the basic shapes like circle, square and triangle. They should also give opportunity to identify other shapes. Visually impaired students can be given time to interact with both two-dimensional and three-dimensional figures through geometric puzzles, shape sorters, building blocks or even teachers can take them for a neighborhood walk. Here, teachers can also insist parents to give these sort of experiences to their children. Both teachers and parents can involve them to climb in and out of boxes or large block structures in their outdoor equipment to experience themselves in space. Teachers can involve them in molding clay or building structures. This will encourage them to make new shapes by putting materials together and taking them apart in different arrangements. Further, visually impaired children can be introduced with spatial vocabulary, including location and position words, movement words and distance words such as near or far, shortest or longest. Teachers can plan for different games or activities to orient them and introduce these spatial vocabulary. To develop this concept, teachers can increase awareness of patterns around the classroom. For instance, teachers can help visually impaired children to find patterns in designs and pictures using tactile materials. Also, teachers can teach different patterns by making students to move from one place to another in a specific pattern. Students can also be engaged in creating and noticing patterns as they string beads, place shapes or blocks into arrays and arrange other materials. Teachers can also talk to visually impaired children about patterns created or noticed in constructing with unit blocks and other construction materials. Over time, visually impaired can reproduce and create more complex patterns. Movement, dance, and playing musical instruments offer opportunities for children to extend and repeat patterns in a variety of ways. Cooking, woodworking, construction, science, and other experiences that involve measurement. Teachers should look for the opportunities in any of these activities to make comparisons and measurements of volume, weight, length and temperature. If needed, they can also sought help from parents. Both teachers and parents can capitalize on children's interest in comparing all sorts of things about themselves. Teachers can make use of tactile charts and graphs where they can see quantities displayed. This contributes their understanding of numbers and their ability to make comparisons. Along with these experiences, teachers of visually impaired should modify and adapt the content of the math concepts to meet the specific visual needs of their children. Teachers should take care in adapting the text material to the visually impaired child. Adaptation should take place without changing and learning outcomes of the math topics. Further, they should ensure training of visually impaired students in using Nimeth Braille codes. These codes will show the mathematical notations in the Braille alphabet. It uses linear formats, spatial arrangements and symbols to convey meanings in mathematics to the visually impaired students. Before teaching of math concepts, it is essential to teach these codes. Nimeth alphabet can make learning mathematics very useful due to its reduction of writing time and length. Teaching of these codes should take place in a phased manner from the very beginning of the child's schooling. Apart from the mastery in Nimeth Braille codes, training in using mathematical devices such as abacus and Taylor frame to the visually impaired child is essential for making necessary calculations. Teachers should also give adequate training to visually impaired students to develop tactile discrimination skills and finger sensitivity. The development of tactile discrimination skills follow in order from larger to smaller. It begins with using the whole hand to explore objects and progresses to using fingers and fingertips to examine the details of tactile materials. This training enables the visually impaired to read the Braille codes and math tactile diagrams accurately. In addition to training of students for Braille literacy, the method which teachers adopt to teach math concept got significant bearing on child's learning. Provision of simulating experiences and creation of situational approaches can enrich learning in mathematics. For example, verbal substitutions are totally inadequate for teaching about the use of money. Going shopping, weighing everyday items and measuring objects will help the student to acquire different math concepts. There is no substitute for hands-on experience in real life situations. So, teachers should try to provide concrete experiences using manipulatives. This will be an appropriate method of teaching mathematics to visually impaired students. In order to provide hands-on experience to visually impaired, math teaching aids play a significant role in understanding math concepts. It is the duty of teachers to prepare and use appropriate teaching aids to supplement instructions in mathematics. For example, diagrams in textbooks need to be carefully selected and suitably modified. It is not sufficient to reproduce or enlarge. Tactile and large print diagrams need to be in appropriate size, clear and uncluttered and good in definition. For many topics where tactile representation is required, additional input of verbal explanation of diagrams will be necessary. Along with teachers, parents play a significant role in inculcating math conceptual knowledge among visually impaired children. Whatever the strategies a teacher uses in the classroom, teachers can also use similar strategies in home environment to teach mathematics. In this lesson, we have discussed briefly on major conceptual areas in mathematics learning. I trust you all have understood these strategies in teaching math concepts to visually impaired students. Thank you.